And now it's time for the need for seeds. Be able to define seed, endosperm, cotyledon, hypocotyl, radicle, and germination. Diagram and define the process of germination. List conditions for germination and explain their relevance. In lab, we're going to compare epigeel and hypogeel germination in beans and peas. So first off, what is endosperm? Now, this is something we kind of looked at during that pollination thing. So you might want to go back and kind of look at that. It's in the plant reproduction. What happens is you have an egg cell and a central cell, and each of them will get fertilized by one sperm cell. The egg cell, when fertilized by one sperm cell, will result in a zygote, which will result in the growing embryo. However, the endosperm comes from the central cell getting fertilized by a sperm cell, and it is triploid, meaning it has 3 copies of the genome. Now, the resulting endosperm will usually be made of mostly starch. In fact, when you think of seeds, you're going to think of starchy seeds. That's just endosperm, especially if you're starting to think about grains. Why do seeds exist? Well, they can serve as dispersal in 4 dimensions. Now, we know a seed can fall far from the tree, or maybe a seed doesn't fall far from the tree, but it doesn't have to germinate right away. So it can grow into a full plant soon, later, perhaps even up to 80 years later, which means the parent plant could be dead. So it disperses in time as well as in 3 dimensions of space. And if you compare this with spores, spores are a lot smaller, so they can get caught on the slightest breeze and end up thousands of miles away, whereas most seeds don't travel thousands of miles, but some can. However, seeds having larger size are going to have more resources for the growing young plant. Thus, you put a seed and a spore right next to each other, the seed is going to grow a plant, the spore is going to grow a small, very quickly out-competed plant. For dicots, we call them dicots because the growing seed will produce 2 seed leaves, also known as cotyledons. And those growing seed leaves will generally take up all of the endosperm in the seeds, especially with beans and peas. The endosperm gets taken up by the cotyledons, which will now contain all of the nutrients for the growing young embryo. In monocots, you often still have the nutrition in the endosperm, hence the starchy seeds that you think of with grasses. And there's only 1 cotyledon in a monocot seed. So that first seed leaf, if you think about grass or corn, you get 1 leaf coming out of the ground when you plant them. Whereas peas and beans, you're going to get 2 seed leaves coming out of the ground after you plant them. Now, what happens first in germination? Well, you're going to need a radicle. And the radicle is the root that comes out of the seed. This is the first seed root, and that will come out before the first seed leaves. It's just not as useful for identifying them because there's always just, well, 1. And the radicle comes out because seeds are dry and they need water. Remember, roots get water. It also anchors the seeds so the plant can begin to grow. So here's germination. It's the growth of plant out of a seed. What's going to happen is the seed will get moistened, and then the radicle will come out. As a radicle goes down, you get the cotyledon, or in this plant, the coleoptile. It's the first tissue around the leaf. And then you're going to get your first true leaf coming out. The radicle will continue to dig deeper. The leaf will elongate, and eventually the leaf will reach the sunlight where it will start photosynthesizing. Then you're going to grow more roots. Then you're going to grow more leaves, and then you've just got a plant at that point. Now, conditions have to be met for germination. You've got this winter wheat here, and winter wheat is special because it will germinate before the winter begins. But as we're going to see in a later lecture, some plants wait until spring to begin germination. Some plants are going to wait until they actually pass through an organism before germination. So you're going to wait for all these right conditions. So what are some conditions for germination? But for most plants, it's going to be pretty straightforward and simple. They need water. They need oxygen, because if they don't have oxygen, that growing radicle can't really metabolize and can't grow. It'll just suffocate. They need the right temperature. A frozen seed should not be growing. Often they need cues from soils and nearby microbes to know that this is the right environment to grow. In fact, orchids don't grow unless they have the right type of fungus. And seeds might need the right type of light. We're going to cover that in more depth later, but so the growth of the young plant. Well, the hypocotyl is the part of the stem underneath the cotyledons. You can see that the hypocotyl has expanded in these beans to push the cotyledons, those 2 seed leaves, above the soil. Now in peas, what you're going to get is the epicotyl, which is a part of the stem above the cotyledons, and that's going to expand. The pea actually stays below the ground and sends up the epicotyl, where you're going to see those first leaves are not the seed leaves, but the first true leaves, because the seed leaves, the cotyledons in peas, stay below the ground. We're going to look at this more closely in lab.